Okay, so hello, this is Liam O'Mara. You're on Office Hours with Mad Professor, for another session in I Conversations series where we just yammer on with somebody about something interesting. And I have an interesting guest tonight. We're going to be speaking with Ali Dalsimer, who's a candidate for Congress in Virginia's 11th district. So, hello, Ali.
Hey, Liam, how are you?
Good, good. It's been a little while since we've had a chance to chat, but
Yeah,
I got to talk to you pretty early on when you were considering running for Congress.
that's right. We called you for advice when we were still deciding whether or not this was going to be something we were going to do, and you warned us, and we still did it. So
Right, right. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting roller coaster, but we need more and more good people stepping up to do it, and it's not easy to get through. So, mad props to you for stepping into the ring.
yeah, thanks. I've actually enjoyed it. Starting out, it was a challenge. It was a whole new type of schedule. It's a whole new type of world. The people who work in the political field are very different from the people that I'm used to working with. In terms of just really communication styles and work styles and whatever. And so there was a learning curve, but I've really enjoyed everything. I've learned so much, and I'm looking forward to learning more. And what's really awesome for me in particular is having had a career. I'm doing this because I really want to make a difference, and it's important.
Right.
Um, but I'm not doing it because I want to work in politics for the next 30 years. That's not why I'm doing it. So it takes a huge pressure off me, and I don't have to worry about what I'm saying. I don't have to, I know there are some folks who have cautioned about being too uh, open or honest with my policy positions, um, because they say, I might alienate people down the road, or I don't know, whatever. It doesn't matter. So, it's actually really liberating, and I've enjoyed this, and it's wonderful, and I've really enjoyed being part of the progressive movement. With the candidates who are part of this, who are inspired by Bernie and the changes that he wanted to bring, universal health care and Green New Deal and all these things. And, being part of that and being part of a group of people who all have common objectives has just been really motivating and energizing. So I'm loving it.
That is fantastic. It's exactly what I was hoping for you, because it really is. If you come in with the right attitude, it really is a fascinating experience. It's got to be one of the most interesting and rewarding things I've ever done in my life. It's there's so many things you get a chance to learn.
Hmm.
To practice, to figure out. You mentioned people speak a little bit different or expect a little bit different in politics, and that was actually one of the real challenges for me because I'm accustomed to public speaking, but in a very different venue.
Right.
And in politics, everyone wants the 10-second answer and off to the
Yeah.
next thing, and it's really just not my mode. And the honesty too. Wow. Because, yeah, I start off kind of reflexively honest to begin with, and then I'm an academic by profession, so we don't bullshit you. My job is to blow minds for a living and to tell people what's actually happening. And in politics, it seems that the advice frequently is telling people that you're supposed to snow the voters a little bit, to
Hmm.
just or pander or make your positions so vague that anybody can project onto you their own beliefs and still vote for you. And to me, I don't know, I the politicians that I have most respected, whether current, and you mentioned Bernie, I've been a Bernie fan forever, but there's quite a few of them across our history that have spent the time to make an idea popular. You're going out there and you're talking about it, and you're convincing people this is a good idea and this is how it's going to help you, and that's how we get somewhere. If you're
Hmm.
out there always trying to talk to someone's existing beliefs and then everyone has different beliefs anyway to go into it, I don't know. I tend to think that's part of the problem. So I applaud the approach that you're taking.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. And you mentioned the public speaking part. That's, I'm used to, in my career, for those who don't know, I spent the last 22 years of my career working in the Defense Department, and I did a lot of presentations. I ended up
Hmm.
managing their natural resources program at the headquarters level. And so I did a lot of
Hmm.
presentations, but it was always from, a PowerPoint that I'd put together that talked about things I'd been working on for the entire year or for 6 months, or that I was going to be doing and that I was integrally involved in, and then, you're like, okay, you have 3 minutes to tell us your platforms on XYZ. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, um, yes, right. I'm gonna do that. So it is a whole different experience. But I'm kind of learning that too. I was really, really nervous. The first couple interviews I had, I was super nervous. I was afraid I was gonna say the wrong thing. I was gonna say, something that was inaccurate in terms of my beliefs or something like that. And, kind of, I mean, it's not like I've been doing this forever. I've only been doing this for, 4 months now, but um even still, it's, you know I mean, it's,
You learn
if
fast.
you say what well if you say what you believe, then there's no wrong answer. People
Hmm.
may disagree with you and think you're wrong, but it's not a wrong answer to say something that someone else disagrees with. It's just a difference of opinions or a difference of positions.
Right.
So yeah, and that takes a lot of pressure off as well. And plus, to be honest, it's so weird, but actually some of the really negative comments that we've gotten, like on Twitter and stuff, little hate tweets and stuff, they're so absurd that they're actually funny.
Hmm.
And they've actually made me much more comfortable. I mean, say what I worked in the military for 20 years. Trust me, there's really hard to rattle me.
Right.
I've heard it all. And I definitely am. I think I was worried, making mountains out of molehills, like they say, right? Because
Hmm.
who cares what somebody who has no idea who you are, or even doesn't even understand what it is you're trying to say, um, you know, make some personal comment. It's you know,
Yeah, the trolls are a lot of fun, actually.
right? Trolls.
Um,
That's the word.
and I mean, I've gotten a lot more snarky with them since I'm out of politics again. Um, and I don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, alienating a voter,
Right.
but I always was happy to have them there anyway, because them posting stuff, I mean, all they're doing is, I don't know, humiliating themselves, really, by posting this ridiculous crap. And it often gives you an opportunity, if you take it, to respond in a way that clarifies your own points for other people. The troll themselves, they're not listening. They don't care. It's part of
Right.
the game. They're just there to like try to rattle you and call you out or mock you or whatever. But there are people who are going to see their posts, and then your measured comment to it, can actually give you an opportunity to respond to things that, I mean, I often took it, well, I would never have thought to kind of clarify this point, but this is a really cool chance to
Hmm.
do that. It's funny. You mentioned the whole, working for the Defense Department for so long. Yeah, it was like, yeah, I studied political extremism, and I've been shot at by extremists before. I'm not easily rattled by some Yahoo on Twitter that thinks that they can scare me or something. Are you kidding? Really? What do you-
Yeah.
so I love
Yeah.
that, kind of fire too in candidates. So it's great to see that in you.
Well, what's been really actually good is that overall, though, despite the funny asides sometimes, we've had a really positive
Hmm.
response. So the
Yeah.
so our strategy for the first couple months was to call into and participate in as many of the local district meetings that we could, and local caucus meetings that we could, because
Hmm.
I was new to politics. I was new to what was going on, so calling into the various meetings that they were having through the Fairfax Dems, less so for Prince William, but only because we couldn't find as many online events. But the Women's Caucus, the Environment Caucus, etc., and really, really learning and trying to participate in a virtual way while we were building our team and building our ground game kind of behind the scenes. And then in June, we got our COVID shots, things started opening up here in Virginia, whatever. We had our launch in mid-June. Also, Virginia it's just one of two states that has a 2021 election. We have a gubernatorial election. So that's the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and some House districts. And so everybody here was focused on the June 8th primary. And we tried to reach out originally, like, Sunrise, Virginia or whatever. And everybody's like, no, not yet, not yet, not yet. Talk to me later, talk
Yeah.
to me later. And so it really worked out well. And then, like I said, we had our kickoff in mid-June. And since then, we've been getting out, we've been talking to voters, we've been, just trying to engage. And it's been really amazing. Clearly, we've only gotten a small fraction of the folks that we're going to hit over the next year. Our primary is June 14th of 2022. But we're getting probably a 75 to 80% positive response rate
Nice.
when we talk to people. A lot of people were unaware that the current representative did not support things like universal health care. He has said that he will never support Medicare for all. They were unaware that he's got this halfway position on the Green New Deal. He supports a carbon neutral position by 2050, which would result in a 27% carbon reduction in this district by 2050. And that's way too little, way too late. We need to be looking at methane, which has, an 80-fold greater impact on, on global warming emissions than carbon over the next 20 years. And they were unaware that he doesn't support the Child Care for Working Families Act. He doesn't support universal pre-K. He doesn't support all these things that, because he presents himself as a progressive,
Right.
they just thought he supported, and he doesn't. And when they learn that, we've just been getting name recognition. The more we get out and about, the more we're going to be able to help people understand that there's an alternative who actually wants to support the policies that working people want.
Right. Yeah, for a lot of people, progressive is just a word. I mean, they can all say it, hi, I'm a progressive, and please
Yeah.
give me more of that fossil fuel money.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's nice
Yeah.
to
In
see the
fact,
positive
he took
response you're getting.
2,500 from Dominion Energy, which in Virginia is a big deal. He took 2,500 just last quarter from them. I've taken lots and lots over the years. He's been in office. He's just gone into his seventh term. I've signed the no fossil fuel pledge, so I'm not taking any money. But yeah, and and I'm not taking any, for folks who don't know, as if you couldn't figure it out, I'm not taking any corporate PAC or dark monies either. So that's important, because then when I get into office, I'm not beholden to anybody.
Exactly. Those pledges have to be the easiest thing I did at any point in the campaign. Like, pledge not to take money from bankers, fossil fuels, whatever. Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
Because you want to be able to actually push through policies that help ordinary people. And American politics has just gotten so corrupted by money.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people in there, that's all they're working for. It's interesting. You mentioned the whole lag on endorsements in Virginia. I mean, Virginia's got to be weird, but the whole like odd years election. So you have to have an election every year.
Every year.
That's just
Voter
God.
fatigue is a serious
Oh.
issue in this district. I mean,
Yeah.
in this state.
Yeah, no doubt. It's bad enough every 2 years seeing them, and it's hard to keep people sort of engaged and interested. Oh, I can imagine the sort of burnout that you get there. But you mentioned going around to the different clubs and events. So I'm kind of curious about something. Just sort of, from my experience, and I don't know how it works with the Democratic Party in Virginia. So I'm just sort of interested. The way you can pursue the endorsement of the party is from all the different delegates in the district, and then from the different clubs. The different Democratic clubs all get a certain number of votes there. And I've seen it happen for quite a few different offices. We've had people that did not get the re-endorsement from the California Democratic Party, and then had to sort of the incumbent had to kind of run without that because somebody else had taken that endorsement from them. Have you had any? I don't know how different it is, but have you had any luck kind of swaying the different Democratic clubs, especially since your policies are more progressive?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think Virginia works a little differently, as I understand it, and I won't pretend to know everything. As I understand it, the local Democratic Party will not endorse a candidate, but they will fully support uh, all of the Democratic candidates running for an office.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, before the June 8th primary, we had multiple candidates running for each of the, governor, lieutenant governor, et cetera, office. And they would post on their calendars, on the Fairfax calendar anyway, they would post phone banking opportunities or canvassing or whatever for all of the people who are running. They didn't take an official position on
Interesting.
it. Yes, unfortunately for me, right now they fully support the incumbent because they are focused on the 2021 election and have said that after the November election, then they will be able to provide resources and whatever. So I am reaching out to them to see. They did post our event, our kickoff event. They're very
Mm-hmm.
open to providing that, but that's different from, say, postcard writing or getting canvassers or the
Right.
kind of on the ground thing. But they try to be, the word that's coming to mind is nonpartisan, but they try to be, I guess, not supportive, but equally available to all Democratic candidates, if that makes sense.
That's really interesting. Because yeah, you won't see that in California. The the different county parties are sort of stuck supporting the incumbents regardless and won't deal with you at all unless you manage to take the state party's endorsement from them. So the county party doesn't endorse really, they don't deal with it at all. They leave that aside. But all the clubs within the district, they can choose to endorse. So if they endorse against an incumbent and then the state party went ahead and you pulled it off there. So if you got the clubs and the different delegates and the state party pulled the endorsement from the incumbent and gave it to you, then the county parties would get involved and you'd have access to different resources. But
Right,
otherwise, there's never anything for an incumbent challenge. It's just sort of you can't primary somebody and
right.
expect any kind of resources from the Democratic Party. It's always just one candidate that they'll back.
That's interesting. Well, I will say I've had mixed receptions from the various groups. Unsurprisingly, the environmental caucus is super supportive of me, because I do
Right.
have a much uh, I have a much more aggressive, and frank I have a much more aggressive platform, and frankly I've got more qualifications on the environmental front. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
spent 30 years working as an environmental professional, and I've managed multiple $100 million programs, and I've written policy. I was the climate lead for the department, which was great under Obama. I was part of the White House Council and whatever. It ultimately was, of course, how I lost my job under Trump. But these things happen. So I
Mm-hmm.
actually have more environmental qualifications by far than the current representative. Um, so
Absolutely.
so there is variability among the receptions for the different groups.
Yeah, and it seems especially with like democratic organizations as opposed to just sort of out there civil society type groups, younger voters often aren't joining those clubs, so their positions don't really get reflected in the votes that they might take. But younger voters really understand that the climate is a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot. The older we are, the less we'll have to deal with this. But that's their world, and we are frying it.
Yeah, quite
So it's,
literally frying and
mm-mm.
flooding it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Did you see the floods happening in Germany and Belgium?
Yes, I have,
Oh, last I
which are
saw that.
directly related to climate change. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting for me, who's been involved in trying to get awareness out about global warming before it became climate change, and I still talk about global warming,
Mm-hmm. I prefer the
but
term.
it's more accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really I mentioned briefly just before we got on, this college professor that I had in college in the 80s, right? And he talked about how you know, he talked about global weirding. He said global warming is not the right word. We need to talk about global weirding. And he didn't mean it in any sort of facetious way. He meant it very literally, because we're going to have more extremes in
Mm-hmm.
temperature. We're going to have weird weather. And we saw that. Texas froze. Who would
Mm-hmm.
have ever thought that would happen 20 years ago?
Right.
The Gulf of Mexico was on fire, right? We had 115 degrees in Portland. And the historic flood we just saw in Germany. Nobody could ever have anticipated these things. And global weirding was what he called it, and it was true. And it's just sad that
Mm-hmm.
here he was in the mid 80s saying, "Look, nobody's talking about this. You need to talk about this. It's been going since the 70s."
Mm-hmm.
That was so. Jimmy Carter was the president who really tried to get energy
Yeah.
savings going.
He
And the
put solar
very
panels on the
first
White House.
Yes, and that was the very first official act of Ronald Reagan, to rip the solar panels out. That was his
Mm-hmm.
first presidential act.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a nod to the oil and gas industry. Hey, who cares about the planet or the people?
Right.
We are all about corporate profits. Let's do this. And the sad part is that if we had taken action, even in the mid 80s, when my college professor was talking to us about this, we would be so much further along if we'd put in the
Mm-hmm.
time and the money to do the research and the
Right.
development into these technologies. And everybody's playing catch up now, and let's get an electric vehicle going. And it's great, and we need to do it, because anything we can do to slow
Oh yeah.
global warming is great, but we've missed the window to reverse it. It's irreversible. We
Mm-hmm.
can't reverse it, but we
Yeah.
can slow it. And
Right.
we have to. We have to, or this life is just going to be hell. It's
Oh yeah.
And not just for our kids, but for us.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
it's a very real thing.
Yeah, I don't get why it's been so difficult, and you still run into people all the time. It's so common that people are, not only do they want to deny it and say, well, there's always cycles and blah blah blah, and they're just going to spit out this propaganda, funded by the Kochs or whatever, to say, well, natural cycles, and ignore our contribution to it, and always trying to stop them, okay, so let's just assume that you're right, and you're not, because we know exactly what's causing this. But whatever, let's just assume that the 2% or whatever people who agree with you are right, scientifically, and we didn't cause it. So what? We still have to do something to mitigate this, or we're all dead. We're already in the middle of a massive extinction event, and it's going to keep spiraling up the food chain, killing off more and more species.
Yeah.
And if we don't get this under control soon enough, I mean, we're going to have heat waves where any exposed mammal life is just going to keel over and die from heat strokes. There's no way to recover from that. Can you imagine the impact in Virginia if there's a heat wave and literally any mammal life outside just fries and dies? I mean,
Yeah.
how devastating is that going to be to local ecology?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's even more complicated than that. I mean, that's definitely a dire sort of uh, cliff fall kind of moment. But things are already happening. And if you've read Ed Wilson's The Web of Life,
Mm-hmm.
y-
I
you
love
know,
E.O. Wilson.
yeah, I do too. I got to meet him one time. It was kind of cool.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, it
Big
was. It was
hero of
kind of
mine.
a funny story. I'll tell you this story.
Oh,
So
that'd
it's
be
kind
great.
of funny. So I have this friend, a wonderful woman I used to work with, and she was his teaching assistant when he was at Harvard, and she got her doctorate there. And when she was a doctoral student, she taught his intro biology class or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, um, we were at an event at the Fish and Wildlife Service one day, and it was this big reception and this whatever. And she was like, "Oh, I watch Allison. Allison." Well, so I went by Allison. So Allie, whatever. Come meet my friend Ed. I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll meet your friend Ed, whatever." And she was like, "Ed, Ed," and he turns around and it's E.O. Wilson, and I was like, "Hi, hi, I love your book." I was like, "Ah,
Oh,
you idiot."
those are great. But how do you? Oh man.
But anyway, what I was going to say before I went off on that tangent, sorry about that. But If you look at things like the changing precipitation patterns and changing weather patterns and changing cycles of moisture and heat and whatever, you're having flowers blooming at times where they historically have not. And then you have
Hmm.
pollinators coming through expecting to get food and shelter in those flowering plants, and
Right.
they're not getting it, and they're
Hmm.
dying off. And birds and bats and all these other things. And
Hmm.
people have said to me, "Well, why do you care?" I'm huge on pollinators, and people are like, "Why do you care about pollinators?" I'm like, "Well, I like chocolate. I like apples. I like almonds and blueberries.
I
I like
I like
tequila.
I like coffee.
These are things that
We're
coffee,
gonna lose coffee.
chocolate, you cannot have these things without pollinators. They are
Hmm.
obligate species. And it's the whole cycle, the web of life that Ed Wilson talks about is you can pull a thread out of a web and it's fine. It's like that game Kerplunk. You can pull a stick out, you're okay. Pull another one out, maybe you drop one or two of those little marbles. Eventually, you pull one of those sticks out, just one, and the whole thing comes crashing down. And that's what we
Hmm.
have to work to prevent. That is why we have got to care and why we've got to take action at
Right.
a federal level through implementing, national and international policies, at a state level through state, like cafe standards and other, state
Right.
regulatory things, and at an individual level, each and every person needs to help and make a difference, because while one person may think nothing I do can make a difference and it's just me, the reality is, it's the analogy that I've given before, is one drop of water isn't a big deal, but if you got a bazillion
Hmm.
drops of water, you have a rainstorm and it makes a difference, right?
Hmm.
People can make a difference.
Right.
So, we have to tackle it in this multi-pronged strategy. I'm fond of saying you can eat more salad with a fork than you can with a single chopstick, right? So we have to use a fork to tackle these issues. And that's true for the other issues as well, the education and criminal justice reform and healthcare and
Hmm.
all these things. We've got to tackle with a multi-pronged inside outside approach, right? We've got to do the work inside the government, and we have to be outside with the activists, with people demanding these things, because that's the only way change is going to happen.
Absolutely. I I'm always trying to point out to people that you can't trust the politicians to fix things. What drives the politicians is street politics. They will move when we move. When you put a million people on the streets, the politicians will suddenly realize, I might lose my job. Maybe I should take a little bit less money from this lobbyist and do something about this. And as long as we're still feeling complacent about this, it just isn't going to happen, which means a great deal of it has to fall into, well, it really has to fall on us to sort of raise awareness of this and just how important it is. I love that you're talking about, like, the bees and the other pollinators in there, because most people just don't care. Oh well, I won't get stung this summer. I don't care. Like, are you kidding me? The crops are all going to start dying,
Yeah.
and it's just, again, these things just ripple up the food chain and they start to take us out. We're already in an extinction event here that's just going
Yeah.
to continue onward, and it's, if we don't manage to reverse course, it's going to take us out too.
I'm pretty sure about 97% of native bees are non-stinging also. And bumblebees
Right.
and things that do sting don't bother you. You know what stings?
Right.
Wasps. Wasps sting, and many of
Right.
them are not native. They're invasive species. And we could have a whole discussion on invasive species, because we have a very
Mm-hmm.
backward policy on bringing plants and animals in. Australia learned the lesson the very hard way, and you can look that up if you like. They
Mm-hmm.
now have what they call the red plan or the red book or something. You cannot bring a species in until you prove that it will not become invasive. And for those who don't
Right.
know, a species that is invasive is one that is not native to an area and that will overtake and decimate other species. So it's not a cow, right? I mean, a cow is not native. Cows weren't here until they were brought over. But something like kudzu, which is, nicknamed the vine that ate the South, because it will
Right.
cover an entire stand of forest, and it will destroy that forest. It will eat it up and
Mm-hmm.
cause it to fall. And
And hard to get
so
rid of too.
they're real, yeah, invasives are hard to get rid of, and it's a small percentage of non-native species that become invasive, but they are responsible for massive damage to native
Mhm.
ecosystems. And wasps sting, they're aggressive. We do have Africanized bees that are coming up from the south. That's a non-native invasive that is a bee that does sting. But I think that I'm getting off track because this is, this is my area. This is what I've been doing for
This
30
is
years.
this is
So
honestly, I love that, and that's really what I kind of aim for in these anyway. So don't apologize for the tangents, because the tangents are the fun of doing this.
awesome.
It's an opportunity to really to get to know you and to share some of your expertise, and I quite enjoy this stuff. I mean, my my area of expertise is quite different. I study intellectual history, but I've always kept like a toe in the sciences because I'm fascinated by it. I spend a lot of time studying like evolutionary biology, so
Right.
it's a very narrow aspect of it that interacted with some of my other interests, so it sucked me in. But
Right.
that's it. Or I kind of enjoyed a lot of those like pop physics type things, but as soon as you put the equations on the page, my eyes glaze over. I start to drool, like, oh, what is this?
Right.
But I can read like Michio Kaku or Brian Greene
Right.
or something, and I
Or the
love that
story of
stuff.
the white moth that turned black in the UK during the
Oh,
Industrial
yeah,
Revolution.
yeah.
That was fascinating, right?
It was, and I loved the story of how we discovered so much of this stuff. The progress of biology across the 19th and early 20th century, all the way up toward the modern synthesis in the middle of the 20th, was just a fascinating story. And they got so much wrong, but that's
So
kind of
much.
what
Yeah.
science is about.
Yeah.
It's you come up with an interesting idea, you try to test it, you look for evidence. Oh, we went down the wrong corner there, and then you reverse and you find it. And in the end, you get to a point where, okay, this is kind of unimpeachable. This is good stuff.
Hmm.
But it's an interesting. I'm fascinated by the process of it.
Right. Right. I can't remember who said it, but there's somebody famous who said something to the effect of the way to achieve success is by failing better and better each time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right, exactly. And there's so many great little cliches like that too, where you're just supposed to like pick yourself up, and every failure is a new lesson. That's one of the reasons it's so interesting to tackle like an entirely new thing, like jumping into politics. I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined I could have been a successful politician.
yeah.
Like a rampaging gadfly waving signs or whatever with the Greens in Long Beach back in the day. Yeah, okay. Like an activist. Sure. I was in that battle in Seattle in '99. Like I get that. But an
Hmm.
actual politician, I was always like, a bunch of baby kissers, whatever. Never would have occurred to me. But it was such an interesting experience, and I
Yeah.
learned so much through it. So yeah, I love those interesting twists that you
Hmm.
can take. The this whole question though of a kind of impending environmental catastrophe, I think that we have to come up with a better way really to deal with this. And I don't mean it just in terms of trying to reach the right wingers who are going to keep denying this, because they'll probably they would probably deny the meteor that's heading right for their house. Like whatever. It just at some point you just got to like whatever. But for ordinary people, I think, because everywhere I look around me, they're all good people. I can talk to them about a whole range of issues, whatever. But this is just never, ever on their horizon. It's just some distant, abstract thing.
Yeah.
The scientists now think it's going to get hotter, whatever. Oh, the summer's kind of hot, but whatever, that's nice. At least the winter wasn't as bad, and who cares? How do we reach ordinary people and get them to understand that, hey, when this insect dies, we're screwed?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And I think there are several parts to that. I'm going to take a little bit of a step back. So I've been talking with both Republican and Democrats, um, who pretty much universally dislike the current representative. So I'm actually making pretty good headway with a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
Republicans as well. They don't agree with all my policies. When it comes to the environment, though, um, people who a lot of the Republicans that I've happened to have spoken with also tend to be very religious. It just happens to have been my small sample that I've spoken to.
Hmm.
And the reality is, when I talk to them about being stewards of the earth, right?
Good.
That's a message that resonates. They are here to take care of the people of the
Hmm.
planet. They are entrusted by whatever their God may be, um, to take care of the planet. And
Hmm.
that's a message that people understand, and they understand the need to protect resources for their children. They need clean air and clean water for
Hmm.
themselves and for their families. And regardless of your party affiliation, you're going to want those things. So rather than talk in abstracts of climate change and global warming and this and that, when you're talking with people, just trying to put things into a context of, you need clean air and water. Right now, for example, here's a messaging, right? Right now, you know, a lot of the folks are talking, Biden's Green New Deal, putting in this infrastructure plan, the $3.4 billion plan, and people are like, we don't need infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the thing, right? So every every 2 minutes, a water pipe bursts somewhere in the US. That's infrastructure. In
Hmm.
Virginia, there are nearly 2,800 water treatment facilities, and 90% have at least one violation. These are infrastructure. So instead of talking about Green New Deal, talk about the fact that we actually have lead and poisons in our water. And you can't
Right.
believe what the corporate water company may be saying. The reality is our water isn't safe. Same with the air. We have to have
Hmm.
clean air. So rather than, it's trying to talk to people, it's not changing your message, it's changing how you deliver the information that is the core
Right.
aspect of the policies that you are trying to help people understand, right? Because
Right.
people get that. And the reality is that, if you invest in something, in almost any public good, whether it's education, whether it's the environment, whether it's um, human rights, you're going to have a return on that investment that is
Hmm.
going to be some factor greater. For education,
Oh
every
yeah.
dollar invested in early education leads to more than $7 in
Hmm.
cost savings down the road, right? For
Yeah,
the
just basic
environment,
infrastructure something is something like,
basic
a
infrastructure.
threefold return in productivity.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's more than that, because then you're not even looking at the healthcare costs that are being
Hmm.
saved.
Right.
So if people say, why do I care about climate change? My first response is, it's super hard to care about climate change or the environment when you're literally having trouble paying your rent and putting food on the table. I get
Hmm.
that. But you do care about the fact that you don't want lead in your water. You do care about that you don't want, um, you know, toxic pesticides all over your food. Or, you know what, in 40 years, if we're not taking care of our soil, guess what? We're not going to have topsoil. We're not going to have food. That's a real
Hello,
thing.
Dust Bowl.
So yeah, exactly. So I think the bottom line is that people will care if you help them understand how it relates to their personal lives. And then
Hmm.
just generally in terms of climate, frankly, it's the underlying issue for, I think, every other issue out there, basically every other sort of public issue, in terms of uh, you know, education. Even if you look at education, you look at schools that are in areas that don't have good water, or don't have shade, or don't have, they don't have the food they need. And if you backtrack that out, it all comes back to some sort of environmental aspect, right? And you have racial inequalities,
Yeah,
and you have
that's
all kinds of things that
oh,
are based on that.
environmental
You've got
just
power
like
plants that are placed in,
oh man,
disproportionately poor areas. And
right.
it really, if you just take it, when I was working with the environment, one of the first lessons I learned, I was working at a nonprofit foundation. It was called the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. It's a great group, and they leverage public-private resources to fund high priority conservation efforts. And one thing I learned there was, first of all, working collaboratively, finding common ground, bringing together disparate partners who would not normally come together. Because I got to tell you, in the early 90s, farmers and tree huggers were not talking the same language. And we brought them together,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the reason was it was because it was all about the land. We
Mm-hmm.
wanted the land for different things. Hunters wanted to be able to hunt, and environmentalists wanted clean air and water and trees and bugs and bunnies, and farmers wanted to have, pollinators and hedgerows for their crops, and they wanted
Right.
sufficient water. And it all came down to the land base. It was the same common denominator. So it was all about messaging and bringing people in to help with
Mm-hmm.
the big goals, and then they could manage their smaller goals, the ones that address their particular constituents or affiliations more directly, right? And it's so
Right.
this is a way of coming back around and saying, when someone says, why should I care about the environment? Why should I care about climate change? If you put it in terms that help them understand how those aspects relate directly to their
To
lives,
their
their
lives.
well-beings, everything. The fact is that if you're already struggling to pay your rent, and then you're going to have an air conditioning bill that's going to be,
Mm-hmm.
$300 a month or something. eh,
Right.
Hello, how about planting some trees? Because that will reduce the temperature 20 to 30 degrees. Boom, right there.
Mm-hmm.
So, or if you're flooding, how about we stop ripping out all of the natural areas and paving everything, because that leads to huge runoff. It leads to
Mm-hmm.
flooding. And if you simply plant grass and trees, it soaks all that water in
Right.
and it keeps it. And it also stores carbon and all these other
Mm-hmm.
things. So everything in nature is very complicated, but it's all really simple at the same time.
Yeah, it's driven me nuts for a long time that practically the entire length of the LA River is concreted. So we're just, it just go flows out to sea. None of it goes
Yeah,
back. And you wonder why the aquifers are empty, why it's
right.
destabilizing some of the ground, and hello, and we have to steal so much water from Northern California. Well, okay, we're just throwing it out into the ocean when we should let it sink into the soil.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of that just comes back to some basic NIMBY attitudes that people deal with. The reason we started concreting the river in the first place, way back when, was that rivers naturally flood every now and then, and people are like, oh my gosh, it's affecting my property or something. So they're like, well, we'll just concrete this thing so it can't do that. Put in all these barriers. Sure, it protected the house, but it has a significantly negative long-term consequence. And we have to be able to learn from things like that and find better ways to deal with it instead of just continuing with the same old flawed approaches. I love that you're focusing on, well, I guess to put it in like George Lakoff's terms, the sense of framing an issue. Because you're not changing your position on something, but you're going to
Yeah.
approach it in a slightly different way. I tried to do this a lot in my campaign because, unlike your district, mine was heavily red. So I
Hmm.
had to reach out to a lot of Republicans too if I wanted to increase the overall turnout. And you approach things very differently there. But that is, we've known about that for a long time. How did Teddy Roosevelt get involved with so many progressive causes like conservation? He's a hunter. Yeah,
Right.
I hate the idea of safaris and hunting and whatever, but hey, it got him on the right side to start setting aside national parks and wilderness areas. So yeah, win-win.
Yeah.
We still got there,
Hunters and anglers started the conservation
right?
movement. And
And
it's
today we
definitely
alienate them. We push them out of that so that you're not building a bridge that actually could give you a
correct.
large enough coalition to get something done.
Right.
I think if we could find ways to get, more liberals over the squeamishness about dealing with hunters and anglers on these kind of issues, we actually might be able to build a much larger environmental lobby and accomplish more things. And you got another great one in terms of the well, not only the impact on people's lives if you're already sort of struggling to pay your bills, but okay, so the environmental justice issue. Yeah, all the pollution tends to be in poor areas because, go figure, the rich people have more lobbyists and can put the stuff over there.
Yeah.
But we stopped investing in so much infrastructure, and it's just a matter of like, well, if it bursts, we'll fix it then, and then they just patch it up. We don't lay things out anymore, and everything is breaking down. I mean, yeah, you mentioned pipes bursting. Less common of an issue here. We have a lot of things like, say, wildfires from
Yeah.
old electrical infrastructure, because the land is already dry out here, and we're not going to fix that because we can't force it to rain if it's not going to. But if it's going to be drier, we have to be better about the way we live around it so we don't cause these fires all the time. And SCE and PG&E have zero incentive to invest in that infrastructure.
Right.
They want to milk every possible dollar out of it. So
Right.
we just have decaying
Yeah, and
transformers that blow up.
well, and that's one of it. I talked about the fork, but you also have companies like Nestle draining the aquifers, and
Right?
you also,
Yeah.
as you just
Right under my
mentioned,
feet. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and as you just mentioned, you've got, a concreted culvert that used to be a river. There's
Yep.
nothing but a lack of will. And if people made a big enough stink, if you boycotted Nestle, get everybody to boycott Nestle, or if you tried to get, you know, there's a lot of rainwater capture technologies that exist. I'm not sure about scaling it up citywide,
And
but there's got to be
they've been making them
something that can
illegal,
be
though.
done.
This is where the
Hmm?
lobbyists again keep outmaneuvering us. In tons of states, it's actually illegal to collect rainwater because they want to force you to buy the bottled stuff. So they, in the same way that, okay, so California gets a whole lot of sunshine, right? I can't put more than like what 20% of my roof in solar panels or something like that, because they don't want you to generate extra electricity. They want you only to use what you want to use and not, I don't know,
That
store it
sounds like
up
a
or
law that
help your
needs to be
neighbors.
changed. That
Yes,
sounds like
exactly.
a law that needs to
Hmm.
be changed.
They want to
You
limit how
know?
much solar we can deploy, which, hello, would really help the environment if we were using more solar. Tons of
Right.
homeowners that have the will and the desire to install that solar, but they limit it because the lobbyists can bribe Sacramento to block us from putting solar on our roofs because they want to keep selling the stuff. Rainwater collections, solar panels, all kinds of stuff where they've directly interfered with our own ability to do something. And you mentioned, yeah, earlier, we all can do something. There's always there's power in numbers, and I think a lot of people really discount the amount of power that we have. You can say, well, I've only got a few bucks to spend. I can't help out a political cause or this or that. Every dollar helps. Every little
Yeah.
action helps. So, okay, so California has tons of droughts, right? So, I don't know, I just take less showers and towel bathe more often to save water. Does my doing that actually save enough to make a difference? No. But if my neighbors do it too, and we tell more people, hey, you know what? You don't need to spend, 15 minutes in a shower every day, you know, to get clean. There's tons of
Yeah.
other ways to do this that don't waste as much water. Or people that, when I grew up, everyone was using the hose and water to wash down their driveway.
Right.
Just use a frickin' push broom.
Yeah.
I mean, just changing those little habits make a
Right.
huge difference. One person, no. But if the whole neighborhood stops using the hose in their driveway, it really scales up.
How about if all the neighborhoods got together and went to Sacramento and demanded to be able to use solar panel technology and rainwater catchments and all that kind of stuff? That would be nice.
We
I had
absolutely
no
do.
idea that that was a thing in California. That's absurd.
It
At least
really,
here in Virginia, we do have some incentives for putting in solar panels and whatnot.
yeah,
Um,
they try to play it both ways. They try to set it to where, oh, we'll use state programs to give an incentive to install solar, and then they severely limit how much you can put. So it looks like they're trying to be all green. Oh, the California Green New Deal. But it's really just, it's a con job to
mm,
fluff the major utilities because they're contributing to all the politicians.
right.
And it's difficult to get across that. I mean, you mentioned boycotts, and boycotts are great, but here's one of the problems that I have with them, and I'd love to see if we can find some way to improve upon this. One, most people just don't give a damn. So, I mean, you can call a general strike, you can call a boycott, whatever. People are like, whatever, and they just don't do it. So it's hard to get the numbers for it. But even there, when you're looking at giant multinationals, how do you boycott Nestle if you don't even know all the different brands that they actually own? It's never going to touch their pocketbook. If Nestle owns 500 different brand names and everyone's going to buy all their crap without knowing it, I mean, how do you
Yeah.
boycott a big company like Kraft or whatever? You can't. Procter and Gamble.
I don't know.
It just
My family boycotted Nestle in the 70s when they did that horrible thing with selling formula to new mothers in Africa.
it was
For
easier
those who
though.
don't,
We
for those
we
who don't
didn't
know
let as
that
much.
story,
Oh,
it was, yeah. For
that's a good
those who
one.
don't know that story, it was Nestle went over and gave away free formula and water to new mothers for two
Hmm.
weeks until their, breast milk dried up, and then said, okay, now you have to pay for it. And it was the
Hmm.
equivalent of like a month's wages for one bottle of
Right.
food. Plus, it was in villages where there was no access to clean water,
Hmm.
and tens of thousands of newborns died. It was
Hmm.
horrific. We boycotted Nestle, and we boycotted there were half a dozen different products that were under the Nestle brand at that time, and I'm sure there's many, many more now. But we
Right.
boycotted them all, and Nestle did, you know, finally give up that program, but it was
And the bad press can
bad.
can hurt there too. I mean, if you can get stories like that to run all the time, and that's the hard part, is convincing the corporate media to care enough to run stories on it. But if you can get them to talk about an issue like, hey, Nestle is killing babies, but you know what, they're still doing it now. A lot of these companies are still engaging in horrific practices in the developing world, and Nestle has never actually stopped. They continue to engage in extremely predatory acts in Africa and Latin America, and it's hard to get enough attention. You can maybe you know, bring attention to a specific one, and then people sort of like lose their will. The boycott doesn't give us a great deal of leverage when you're dealing
Yeah.
with giant multinationals in a kind of like neoliberal capitalist model. And I wonder how we can really get around it. I mean, I don't know how many people really understand just how negative big companies like Walmart or Amazon are to mom and pop stores, to a sense of community, to employment, and just to our living standards in general because of their
Hmm.
starvation wages. But who's going to stop ordering from Amazon because it's cheap and convenient? And people are often dependent on going to Walmart because it's cheaper than the other stores. So,
Right.
yeah, they're undermining the wages for people as a whole, but how do you boycott Walmart when you can't afford to shop somewhere
Well,
else?
for Walmart, of course, I mean that's the argument for trying to pass a living wage. That's why we've all been talking about getting a living wage so that you can
Mm-hmm.
actually, you know, pay for and buy the products that you need, and not
Mm-hmm.
have to, you know, be beholden to, in Virginia, the minimum wage went up recently to $9.50. Who can live on that? How do you support a family of four on $9.50
Yeah.
an hour? That's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
Even $15 an hour. Fairfax is
Oh,
expensive.
no.
Fairfax is 150% more expensive than the rest of Virginia, and California is more expensive than Fairfax. How are you going to live on
Oh, yeah.
$30,000 a year, which is what $15 an hour works out to?
Yeah,
If
like
if
MIT's
the
living
minimum
wage
wage should
calculator is telling us that you should be making like 25 to 30 bucks an hour in California.
the
It's
minimum wage in 1968, the minimum wage, if it had kept pace, would now be $24 an hour if it had kept pace with inflation.
right.
So
And no other changes, no other improvements if it had just followed that along. If
just
you
kept
take
pace.
into account a lot of the other improvements in productivity, it should be even higher because our hours are worth a lot more to these companies now with all the computers.
Hmm.
So the fact that we're still fighting to get to 15 when it really should be 30 is just insane. And at that
Yeah.
point, then you can push it up even higher in places that are because when people, things that the right loves to do, well, you can't set a single standard because some places are cheaper than others. Yeah, okay, cool. But there is literally nowhere in this country where less than $15 an hour actually is a living wage. There's nowhere. I mean, if you
I
want to
agree.
live in if you want to live in the middle of nowhere in Montana, great. You still should get $15 an hour, and someone in Fairfax should be getting 30.
Yeah, and there actually is a model for pegging wages to where you live.
Mm-hmm.
because when you travel with the government, they have what they call per diem rates. And a per
Mm-hmm.
diem rate is a rate that gives you how much your meals will cost and how much you should spend on a hotel room based on the city you go to. So if you go to
Mm-hmm.
Biloxi, Mississippi, you're going to spend X amount of dollars for your hotel and X amount of dollars for your meals on average. And that's what they allot you to
Mm-hmm.
spend if you go on government business. Whereas if you go to, say, LA, right, that's going to be a much higher rate. So
Right.
the system exists. The system is there. And it's
All
not going
that
to be
data is already
perfect
tracked.
because people don't always live where they work, but
Mm-hmm.
you could absolutely get a system that is probably 98% accurate
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what the wage should be for the locale you live in. And
Yep.
it's just a matter of having the smart people who are doing those bean
Right.
counting activities just literally apply the system in a different way.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't understand why it can't be done, and frankly, if I'm in Congress, it's something I'm going to push for.
Thank you. Because it absolutely could. And when people are always talking about, well, it'll be more expensive, you have to hire more people to do this, more bureaucrats. Are you kidding? It's already there. Not only
It
do
is
you have the
already
big
there.
university projects like MIT's project there, but the government already does this. The
Yes, they
statistics
do.
are already collected. It would be
Yes.
trivial to apply
It would
this.
be. And not only that, but in DoD, I'm sure it's like this in other agencies, but I'm not familiar with their internal workings. But you get paid a cost of living allowance, a COLA, COLA, a
Mm-hmm.
cost of living allowance that is bumped up in more expensive areas. So if you are,
Mm-hmm.
say, a GS 12, step 4, which is a pay grade level, and you're in some city, you get X amount of dollars for your salary. And that's all publicly available. Everybody can look it up and see what it
Mm-hmm.
is. But if you get a GS 12 step 4 and you're in some, if you're in Anchorage, Alaska, which is super expensive and a 4 ounce glass of orange juice is going to cost you $20, they give you a COLA. They give you a cost of living allowance where they plus you up based on the
Mm-hmm.
increased cost of living in that environment. So
Right.
they're already applying it within DoD.
Right.
Um, so, and
That's a
like I said, I don't know if it's the same for other agencies. I'm not familiar with their internal workings, but we could certainly do it.
Well, again, the point is, we collect that data. We already have, professional economists and bean counters who do those calculations every year as they are required by existing legislation, and we did do that already because in a lot of government departments they wanted to make sure that they're doing this right and blah blah blah, not wasting money, and so the the data is there. If we wanted to apply that to wages, we could. The simple fact is, we don't want to apply it to wages. We want people to work for less than they need to survive, and it keeps people scrounging and scrounging so much that they can't really pay attention to who's screwing them.
Well, the argument that I hear a lot when I talk to people about this is, well, my business is going to go out of business if this happens. And my response to that is that's a fallacy, because what
Mm-hmm.
will happen is if you pay people enough that they can actually buy the product you're selling and they can
Mm-hmm.
spend money in their local economies, they can go out to eat, they can buy
Mm-hmm.
clothes,
Right.
they can do these things. It's actually going to benefit your business, right? That's the Henry Ford model. Make the
Right.
car cheap enough so that every employee can actually afford to buy one. It was
Exactly.
revolutionary at the time, and we seem to have gotten right back to the robber baron days where,
Mm-hmm.
only the rich people are driving the cars and the poor people just build them. And we need to get back to the Henry Ford model where we're paying people a wage where they can afford the car, because
Yeah.
that
Yep.
helps
Yep.
everybody. And so I think it's a thing that people who don't want to, people, I hate to pick on them because everybody does, but the Jeff Bezos of the world, right? They don't want to pay that because they just seem to think that another $10 billion is going to somehow make a difference in their lives. I don't know how. But the reality is that it's a specious, it's a false argument. The reality is, if you pay people a living wage, they will
Right.
turn around and spend that money in the economy. If you give money to wealthy people, they spend it abroad. They do not spend it in this country. They
Yeah.
buy
Yeah. Just sock it
Italian
away. Yeah.
marble, they buy
Yeah.
Lamborghinis, they buy second homes in wherever. They just if you really, really take an honest look at the situation, it's a win-win, and it does, it's a rising tide lifts all ships.
Right.
Except for that 0.0002% or whatever it is who, you know,
Yeah, I mean, the billionaires lose out a little bit, but realistically, if you have $1 billion, it's really not possible to spend it if you're just, a normal person. You can't. You're never going to not be rich.
yeah,
You could screw up constantly and you're still going to be a multimillionaire. There's just no
yeah,
way you are ever not going to be rich. But by allowing them to accumulate so much, it is directly pulling it out of our pockets. It lowers our wages. It's the
right.
reason that our wages have been stagnant for so long. It's like we've forgotten some of the important lessons. It bothers me that the wealth inequality today is much worse than it was in the robber baron era, when we did have constant economic recessions and depressions that were harming everybody, and there was a massive poverty rate in this country. And when Ford started doing this stuff, the basic Fordist idea of not only making things, cheaply, but giving people enough money that they could buy it, that wasn't picked up by other people until after World War II. It was really not a common model. And it's the Great Depression that taught us that, because the economy had grown in terms of the market caps and everything else, and productivity had gone up a lot, but wages had not. So there was
Right.
no cushion in spending. So when a business lost a lot of its market cap and they blah blah blah, they're short things, they couldn't count on us and our spending to pick up the slack and keep them in business. They just started shutting down.
Right.
The higher our wages are, the more resilient the overall economy is. I get why a lot of small businesses are worried about it, though, because there's another issue that's different today from when this was applied before, and that really is the size of these gigantic multinationals. That is the size of things like the Wally Worlds and the Amazons out there, that really they have way too much power there. If there's more money in our wages, what's to stop someone from just buying more on Amazon and not buying it from the small retailers that really need it? We do need to do something about the power of these predatory corporations as well.
Yeah.
If we can rein them in a little bit, allow people the convenience. Things change economically. I don't think we need any kind of Luddite arguments really, but something to restrain them in a way. Because realistically, if the
Yeah.
if their profits were reinvested more effectively in the real economy and not just in the stock market, it would still help all of the small business around them. But when their profits are pulled out of the real economy and just sit in the markets and sit in Bezos accounts or whatever, then it is going to drag down a lot of these smaller businesses too.
Yeah, I think in terms of small businesses, based on I've spoken with several small business owners recently, and the thing that really is getting them more than anything, especially the ones I've spoken to, I guess they have more niche markets, are taxes. They're
Mm,
spending literally half of what
yeah.
they earn in taxes. My feeling is, corporations need to be forced to pay the taxes they owe. There was this argument
Hmm.
before about, oh, so and so spend zero on their tax bill, some whatever it was. We have got to make sure that we increase the rate. Well, if they're not already paying the current rate, they're not going to be paying the increased
Right.
rate. It was I didn't understand that argument. Have corporations pay taxes. Boom, just pay them. Get rid of the
Hmm.
loopholes. But for small businesses who don't have the lawyers, the incentives, and the investments, and the this and the that, cut
Hmm.
their rates. There's
Absolutely.
no reason that a woman who owns her own hair salon and is working, by herself has to spend 50% of her income on her taxes. That's
Hmm.
outrageous. That's outrageous. I had this conversation a week
Hmm.
and a half ago. Cut this woman's taxes. Absolutely slash them. Give her
Right.
the whatever it is, whatever that number is, 10% tax rate. Boom. So that she can survive and not have to work 14 hours a day just to make
Thank
ends
you.
meet. That's
Thank you.
ridiculous.
This is
You
a
know?
winning issue for Democrats. So Any other Democrats watching this, pay attention to this. This is how you win. If Democrats are out there saying, we want to actually lower your taxes, and if you can show people the Republicans have repeatedly raised our taxes, because by cutting them on the billionaires, and by cutting them on corporations, and by allowing all those loopholes so that Amazon and Microsoft and General Motors are not paying any taxes at all, then where does that money have to come from? It comes from us. So our rates have gone up. Even where they can push through a cut in some areas, we cut this or that on the federal level, then they're taking away deductions that you needed, so it still goes up, and or your state or municipality have to raise taxes. The money has to come from somewhere to make up that slack. So by giving a break to the rich, it is directly screwing small businesses and ordinary workers. My taxes are too high. Yours probably are too. Most small business taxes are way too high. Corporations are not paying theirs. If Amazon paid their taxes, we could all get a tax cut.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I have no problem with a business making money. Businesses are in the business to make money, but they need to, they need to pay their workers a fair wage. They need to pay their taxes in the same way that small businesses do. And they need to not be influencing politics, because there's no room for profit in a public good, right? So a public good is something where no one should be making a profit. And government is one of those things. So there should not be corporate lobbying allowed, frankly.
Right.
And just think of all the money those big corporations would save that they could pay their employees if they weren't spending bazillions of dollars lobbying Congress.
Well, they do that because it keeps their taxes low. They lobby because it's immensely profitable for them to do so.
It's an investment for them.
I wish more people could understand that, because we have to step up and we have to get rid of the corrupt incumbents who are taking that money in the first place. It's the only way the laws will ever change. If we don't replace the people, we can't replace the laws, and that means the corporations are going to keep writing the laws for us. And it's not, I get the arguments like, well, businesses should make a profit. Okay, fine, that's totally fair. And I get why anybody would want to keep their taxes low. But they exist for a reason. So Amazon trucks, right? Amazon trucks are driving all over the place, right? You know that does damage to roads. You know that it dumps pollution into the air. It's using infrastructure. It's causing harm that does need to be mitigated. So what happens? We are directly subsidizing Amazon because my taxes have to repair the road that their trucks broke.
Yeah, but that's because you're ordering the product, Liam.
Right. And that, again, it gets back to okay, so are we supposed to penalize the consumers and say, well, you can't order this product or this or that and boycott them? No, we need to tax the company.
Yeah.
And
you absolutely have to make sure that that corporations are paying their fair share.
Right.
And you need to eliminate the loopholes that allow them to get away with it. And Warren Buffett himself said he pays less taxes than his secretary, who earns $40,000 a year. And as long as those loopholes are there, he's going to take advantage of them because they're there. Right. He's using the existing system.
Why not?
But he himself has said, we need to fix the loopholes so that you don't have people like Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, paying almost nothing in taxes. I mean, look at Trump. There's a reason he didn't want to release his tax returns, because he didn't pay any taxes,
Right.
And he's not paying his fair share. And he's all these people have the resources. And if you own, if you have like $100 million, okay, so let's say your tax rate is 30%, which it isn't, but let's just say it is, and you have $70 million. You have $70 million. Seriously? Is there really that much difference? Whereas let's say you're making $50,000 a year, and if you have to pay 30% in taxes, now you're down to, $35K a year.
Right.
You're raising a family of 4.
Exactly.
Your mortgage is $3,000 a month. That's $36,000 for your mortgage. You're making $35,000. How does that work? Because I don't know. There's food, there's clothing, there's electricity, and so the scale is
it matters.
Is significant, right? It is. It's super significant.
Yep.
And
if you tax a rich person at $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, it doesn't matter. They're still rich.
They're still
There's
rich.
nothing that's going to stop them from being rich because their
Right.
income is so much higher.
I had
And
a
if we
conversation.
don't
Mhm.
tax them, it again has to come from our wallets.
Yeah.
So when we have voters, that hear all this tax cut rhetoric, they're lining up to back those politicians because they're being hurt. But the
Yeah.
politicians who are mostly talking about it on the right are the ones who are causing their taxes to go up. I don't know why Democrats shy away from this issue, because it really is a way to pull those voters back, to pull swing voters back to the Democratic side.
Right. And it's interesting because I've had conversations with folks and they've said, well, the Democrats just want to raise taxes on us. And they're just going to raise our taxes. And a man said this to me a couple weeks back, and I said, "Do you have $50 million in wealth? Because you're living in my neighborhood. It's a working class neighborhood. You have $50 million?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Then the taxes aren't affecting you." And he was like, "What do you mean?"
Mm-hmm.
Because the rhetoric on Fox and these other One
Mm-hmm.
Nation or News Nation or whatever that thing is, it's all about Democrats are going to raise your
Mm-hmm.
taxes. They're not raising your taxes. they're
Right.
they're they're raising taxes on the super ultra 1%
Right.
people. And so it's important, I think, for Democrats in general to emphasize that message instead of always, we want to tax the rich, we want to tax the rich. And somebody who makes, let's say they make $150,000 a year, they're like, well, I'm pretty rich, they're going to tax me.
Nope.
And that's not what we're talking about here. So
No.
there's Dems have a problem with messaging. They seem to shoot themselves all the time. I don't really get that. But we need to like hire, I don't know, like Nike and Coca-Cola executives or something to try and do our messaging, because the
Yeah. Yeah.
Republicans are hiring those guys and they're doing great.
Yeah.
And we
Exactly. I
don't do
mean,
that.
see, that's the thing. People are going to get bombarded with this propaganda about taxes, and the right wing media and the lobbyists, they're going to lie about it. They're going to lie, and we know they're going to lie. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? And all I see from a lot of Democrats is just a little bit of like, nah, and like polite corrections, and let's correct the facts there. And it just comes across as like talking down to somebody. Whereas if you kind of adopted that same kind of firebrand, I want to lower your taxes, then how does somebody point to you and say, look, the Democrat wants to raise taxes? Because she's over there screaming she wants to lower my taxes. So then it forces them to examine the evidence, because they're going to hear the same argument and they know somebody's lying. So it opens up a space for that. If you spend. Republicans love that Democrats like going after them and like fact checking stuff, because it doesn't affect their base at all. They don't
Right.
care. That's never going to work when you just sit there and contradict something. You have to hit somebody with your own positive message. And a lot of times we get caught up in just, well, really awkward ways of putting it. In fact, honestly, simple expressions like, and you used this earlier, so I'm not picking on you because I totally get why, but this idea of corporations paying their fair share,
Hmm.
because it's such an ambiguous statement and people often don't know what it means. By saying a corporation should pay its fair share, I'm saying Amazon should be paying enough to fix the damn roads their trucks are hurting.
Yeah.
They're basically paying for the right to do it. But as soon as you just say pay your fair share, then it introduces a kind of like subjectivity for people that allows them to kind of like weasel out of actually criticizing this. If instead we were pointing out that we are directly subsidizing this, that the
Hmm.
politicians are forcing me to subsidize the Waltons because they won't pay their workers. So I am paying their wages.
Right.
Republicans really get worked up about, like, I don't know, food stamps or something, which is kind of silly because hello, all the corporate welfare, but whatever. If we just used that and said, hey, you know what? You know why so many more people have to take food stamps? Because Walmart won't pay them enough. So
Yeah.
you're paying their workers. So out of your $60,000 of hard-earned money or whatever, you are subsidizing Walmart because
Right.
they have lobbyists and you don't.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It builds a
Yeah.
sense of outrage.
Connecting the dots. It's hard for folks to connect the dots when they're really, really just, I mean, so many folks are really struggling with the day-to-day minutia of life. And it's
Right.
hard to take a step back and think, let me take a look at this situation objectively. They're not
Mm-hmm.
doing that. They're like, okay, I got to
No.
get my kids up, got to get them dressed. Let's see if
Right.
we can get breakfast. Got to take the bus. It's there. People are having a hard time, and I think that that's why we need honest politicians. And I know that that sounds like, slow children working or whatever, slow children playing, whatever it is. But it's not an oxymoron. We need people in government, and not just at the federal level, but up and down
Mm-hmm.
ballots who
City councils, county
genuinely
supervisors.
care,
Mm-hmm.
exactly, who genuinely care about constituents and about what is the right thing to do,
Right.
and not be either brainwashed by propaganda and lies because they only watch one news media. I mean, I actually saw a bit of a clip, and it was interviewing this guy who's a right-wing commentator who I'm not familiar with, but he said, "Well, I'm an American. I don't watch BBC." And I thought, "Well, you're a stupid idiot then, because you know what? We're part of a globe. You have to listen to AP, you have to listen to BBC, you have to get your news from multiple sources, or you only get one side of the picture. And like they say, no matter how thin that bread is sliced, it's always got two sides. And you
Right.
need the inside and the outside perspective, because there's nothing as informing as listening to someone else's view of what's going on in US society or
Mm-hmm.
politics or whatever, because it's an objective view. They don't have a stake in it, and you can get really good information that way, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And
Yeah, the
there's
vast majority of my news comes from overseas, even for covering American politics, because it doesn't have the same sort of incentives to
right,
BS me that a lot of U.S. media does. But I think
right,
you're kind of I want to see if we can clarify something and help out here, because you're hitting something that's sort of like near and dear to my heart. I mean, I've got like 40 news apps on my phone. I mean, I read a lot,
right,
but who has time for that? And I totally get most people don't have time for that. This is, I think, a
yeah,
mistake a lot of Democrats make, is they spend their time talking about policy and facts and blah blah blah, and instead of actually helping people connect to something and building a sense of outrage over an issue, showing them, hey, you know what? Those guys are screwing you, and I want to
hmm
fix things. If we built a sense of outrage in people, it would draw more people to us. And Democrats used to be really good at that. We used to be really good at the tub thumping and getting out there and showing people, hey, look, the farmers are getting screwed and we need to stand up to the banks.
yeah,
And Democrats don't do that anymore. They're like, well, we have to like pay attention to the bank's position too, and that it doesn't work when you're spending your time giving these very nuanced sort of positions there, because we don't have
well,
time to read all this stuff and see all the different points there. It's kind of
yeah.
up to honest politicians to stand up and point this out.
Yeah, and I definitely try to do that. When I before I started this run, I wasn't working. I'd lost my job when the Trump administration eliminated the position, and then I'd started my own business, freelance business, and COVID kind of killed that. Um, and I was watching 3 to 4 hours of news every day. I don't have the time to do that now.
Right.
Um, but there is news everywhere, right? There are headlines everywhere, and you
Mm-hmm.
pick them up on everything. And
Yep.
I agree that people don't have time to sit down and watch the news, but especially young people, they are super connected. They know what the headlines are, they know what the issues are, because they're on Twitter all the time, and Twitter's got news going all the time.
Yep.
Or they're on they get flashes, like whatever their favorite news source is, they get these headlines pinging on their phones all the time. And I have found that the average 20-year-old knows a lot more about what's going on in the world and in the country than I did when I was 20. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know anything, right? I'm
Yeah.
like, yay, let's do aerobics or whatever. So I feel like people don't have the hours a day to sit down and watch the news, but I don't think that's necessary. but I do think they have a general awareness of the main issues.
Mm-hmm.
However, the exception to that, and I go back to this, is if they are only watching one source of news. If all you watch is MSNBC, you are not getting the full picture. If all you watch
Mm-hmm.
is Fox, you're not getting the full picture.
Right.
If you are getting snippets from a half dozen different sources and you spend maybe 15 to 20 minutes a day absorbing those snippets, you've got a pretty good sense of what's going on from the headlines, right? You know
Yeah. So
about the
that.
Pope, you
Right.
know about Germany. You may not know the details, but you know what the issues are, right? You know about South Africa, you know about Ethiopia, you know these things. You're paying attention. Um, and I think, I guess a nice way to say it would be, my perception is that people today are an inch deep and a mile wide on the news. They have a general sense of what's going on. They may not know the details or specifics. And that's where people who are putting forth policies or who are experts in the area or whatever can, that's their job to get that information,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
The digital native generations certainly have an advantage in that, and it's one of the reasons that, and I see this a lot in my work, that there's so much more of a global consciousness, that people can connect to each other, that we can, follow movements and participate in things, and it doesn't matter what country you're in, you kind of feel connected to other people in a way that, previous generations really couldn't,
Yeah.
because all these technologies bring us together in an interesting way. But it still doesn't affect a great deal of the voting public. Many people
No.
actually do continue to get all their stuff from like TV news, and oftentimes from a monoculture in TV news. And it's not just that you're not getting the full picture. Oftentimes it is actively harmful. I mean, MSNBC loves that they have this reputation as like the liberal or progressive sort of network, and they are actively pro-oligarchy. I mean, they were the worst to Bernie in the
Yep.
whole process. Fox was a hell of a lot more fair, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't always as simple as you think, and they've done interesting, polling work on the impact of these networks, and people who deliberately take in no news at all from these television sources are better informed than people who watch Fox, because it shapes the narrative in a way that only builds outrage in a particular direction and actively blinds you to different issues. And it's not just Fox. There's a lot of criticism, liberals love to like pick on Fox, but they all do it.
Yeah.
Every one of them does it because their goal is to make money off of a particular market, not to inform. We've kind of lost that sense of a media whose
Right.
job is to inform and enlighten. And it's one of the reasons that I do put a little of that on us to sort of like take up the slack, because both the media and politicians in general have surrendered. They've abdicated their responsibility to inform the public. And gosh, I don't know how many people said this all the way up to this. Oh gosh, the last really significant one would have been Eisenhower in 1960. 1961 in his farewell speech, saying that you need an informed and engaged citizenry. We have to be the watchdog on government, because otherwise they will do dumb shit if we're not
Yeah.
paying attention.
So, you probably know this, but the news media used to have well over 20 different, there were 20 different large news corporations in this country, 10, 15 years ago. And now all of the major news outlets are owned by five companies,
Mm-hmm.
just five.
Yep.
So you're not getting that independent quality reporting, which is why there's this nice corollary with shows like yours, independent podcasts, independent broadcasts that are
Mm-hmm.
possible because of the internet, which are providing a great source of information, which is what those young connected online people are watching.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Younger
I
people
gotta
don't
tell you,
watch
I don't
cable
know a
news.
single 20-something-year-old that watches the television news.
Right.
You know who watches that? People my age, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
So
it really starts to fall off in my generation. I mean, I don't listen to radio or watch television news. You
yeah,
know, the people I went to high school with are pretty evenly split. Some do, some don't. But everyone after me, the millennials and Gen Z, they don't. They don't care about this stuff. It's a very small chunk of them that actually care about what's on Fox or MSNBC. It's the internet. It's Twitter and YouTube and everything else that's actually informing people. And in many ways, that's really beneficial. It helps because we've been talking about a lot of these issues for a long time. I mean,
yeah.
I can't even remember when the first edition was, but it was quite a while ago. Ben Bagdikian kept updating this book on a media monopoly. You know, put out a new edition every few years as there were fewer and fewer and fewer companies controlling it. And it's not just the big stuff. They snapped up all the small radio stations,
Still
all the small
independent.
television stations. So now all of your local news is being written somewhere in a corporate office, and everyone's reading the same crap.
Same script.
It's not doing the job that it used to do.
I
And
know.
the media, when it was a bunch of smaller companies, their job was actually to compete to get the best stories out there, to break scoops. We had tons of competing newspapers, and they did really good work. Now even major newspapers are outsourcing a lot of that stuff and firing reporters. They're just
Yeah,
not bothering anymore. And
yeah.
that's really harmful for us.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
There's a reason that the media is the
Edward R.
only
Murrow would be
industry mentioned in
sad.
the Constitution. Like there's literally one industry protected in this country. There's one that's in the Constitution. It's the media. It
Yeah.
has to be. For a republic to function, we do need an informed citizenry. Otherwise, we're just going to get manipulated by, you know, whatever rich asshole of the week has enough money to hit you on the television instead of actually getting to face those issues.
Well, and I
So,
think that's what led to the January 6th insurrection. I mean, that
mhm,
was really a failed coup
it
attempt.
was.
There's no getting around that. People can call it whatever they want. It was literally an attempt to overthrow the government by a
Mhm,
man who used propaganda and the
mhm,
media to tell lies and
right,
talked about stealing the election before it even happened.
right.
He began that messaging. He took a playbook straight
Mhm,
out of history. I won't
mhm,
make a comparison, but he took a playbook straight out of
mhm.
history and used it very effectively. And it's only because of the type of government we have that I think it failed. And it's so sad that so many millions of people still believe that the election was somehow
That's my
fraudulent
fear.
or whatever.
Right.
And it comes down to the fact that people, they just they're easily manipulated, and no one wants to think they're wrong. Like no one wants to say, "Oh my gosh, I was wrong." Like no one ever wants to admit they're wrong.
Right.
It's everybody's a better than average driver. Everybody's
Mhm,
kids are smarter than average. Everybody's
mhm,
better than average. Well, guess what?
right.
That's not right, because if you're average, right? Not
Right.
everybody can be better than average. That's not how it works. And so people have pride, and
Mhm,
so you can't say to someone, "You are brainwashed. You've been listening to propaganda," because they're like, "No, you've swallowed the Kool-Aid. You're
right.
wrong."
Mhm,
And you can't address facts and say, because then they question your source.
right.
Oh yeah, well that's from Wikipedia. That's a bunch of lies. Oh, that's from the whatever. That's a bunch of
Oh,
lies.
you got that from the universities? They did it. A bunch of brainwashing
Exactly, those
Marxists.
liberal universities. So, it's very sad because I don't really see y there's a whole science around de-brainwashing people after they've been in cults. And unfortunately, this is what's happened on a very massive scale. And
Mhm.
the first and hardest hurdle is helping those people realize that they have been lied to, because that's the one thing they don't want to believe.
And that really, I really struggled to figure out how we can even start because you do hit an emotional roadblock there. People will dig their heels in as soon as you point out,
Yep.
yeah, that's just factually wrong. Well,
Yep.
then you're questioning their judgment in the first place, and it gets defensive, and they're going to dig their heels in.
That's right.
It went to none of this should have been surprising, too. This is one of the reasons all across 2015 and 2016 I was telling people Trump should scare the holy hell out of you and Trump could win this election. And people didn't believe me. They just absolutely flat out, there's no way Trump was going to win. I was like, yeah, this is a coin toss. This is going to be close. Trump can win this thing. And the fact that he was saying during that election that if he loses, he's not likely to accept the results. He's like, well, we'll
Right.
see. You know, he was going to play this all along. If he lost, he was going to continue to manipulate that base because it's lucrative. You know, it
Yeah.
works. And none of this really started with Trump either. We've been priming people for this for decades. This is why as a historian, I'm constantly trying to push people back to changes that we made in the 90s and the 80s and the 60s that all set the stage for what we're doing and facing right now. Trump is only a symptom of our general decline. But not only did so many people believe that the election was stolen and could show up in a literal coup attempt and try to force them to change their votes, but
Yeah.
when that failed, the vast majority of Republicans, most Republicans think, well, it wasn't us. That was like Antifa and BLM and whatever, other enemy Fox is telling me about. It was a bunch of like agents provocateurs. It was fake. It's fake news. They're like, it's like the old Alex Jones crisis actors bullshit. They think that the whole thing was just staged to make Trump look bad. And he could again play the victim, manipulate this grievance culture, and people will continue to dig into that lie. So you're right to kind of point to a sort of cultish mentality, but it's complicated in the sense that there's no easy way to fix it with that.
No,
You
there's
can't
not.
turn
There's
to
no
someone.
easy way to fix it.
You're like, sorry, dude, you're in Jonestown. Like, no, I'm not. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah, it is. It is scary. The only thing that I think will save us is the fact that there are a lot of primarily young activist,
mm-hmm,
you know, kids out there who really really care and they get it and they see it.
right.
And they're the ones who are going to do it. I mean, it was my son, a 20-year-old informed, bright, caring kid who said that I needed to run for Congress, right? Because he
Mm-hmm,
said we need a change. This is not right. And you know interacting with him and interacting with his friends and the students and college and high school students that I've been interacting with has just been so energizing.
mm-hmm,
And they get it, they care. They're, like you said, they're much more informed, or maybe we both said they're much
mm-hmm,
more informed than we were at that age,
mm-hmm.
you know. Um, so and I don't think that's true in terms of sort of one big issue. Like, I think we were very aware of sort of the big issues, but we weren't very aware of all the things going on, right? Like, I remember, the Vietnam War and whatever, but I don't remember all the other things that were going on with migrant workers and, workers' rights and
Mm-hmm.
things that were going on in that level. It was mostly, um, what I saw every day kind of thing. And
Yeah,
these kids know things
it's
that they
hard.
don't see every day. They know what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
around the world,
Right.
not just in their backyard.
Exactly. We used to depend upon one celebrity or another raising awareness of something. So we needed to have like
Exactly.
Live Aid or something, and then oh my gosh,
Right.
now I know that there's like starvation or something, and then you'd
Right.
care. And if someone didn't manage to get it into the media and really make it a big deal, you had no way of knowing it. I mean, I was nerdy enough as a kid to be walking to the library all the time and wandering in because they got all these different newspapers, and I could sit there and flop down the different newspapers and see stuff. No one's doing that. No one had the time to do that. You should never have expected people to do it. But digital
No.
natives who are growing up with all this crap coming in through social media and all the different
Yeah.
great news apps that are out there, and now, yeah, I can just sit my butt on the sofa here and read newspapers from a dozen countries. There's no comparison. But we're still, I mean, while, I don't know, we're kind of like drowning in information, but people still struggle to apply it in a way, and it can build a sense of fatigue. And I see this even in younger people. And honestly, I am constantly energized by being around younger people and seeing just the passion they have for these different issues. It really it gives me so much hope for the future. But at the same time, I also see a whole lot more anxiety and depression among younger people.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people are saying, oh, look, they're just a bunch of weak snowflakes or something. They can't handle it. They're stressed out. Well, they're stressed out because they get to see what shit's happening around the world. You know,
Yes.
oh my gosh, there's a war in Ethiopia, and it matters to somebody more now than it ever would have before in the 80s or whatever, because you're exposed to it, and you might have friends all around the world that are experiencing these things and that see it. You
Yeah.
know, we have to find some way still of helping people cut through that. And this is where, again, I think we do need more people to sort of step up and do what you're doing, and to be willing to, to fight for these issues, and to put them in a way that we all can really wrap our heads around. I mean, the younger voters, they're going to see all these different issues, but it still takes somebody to stand there and say, and you know what? Here's a good solution.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons I was so happy that Bernie ran, and as far as I'm concerned, he won both times because he changed the national conversation on some key issues. There are now a ton of co-signers for Medicare for All, and it's just a matter of getting rid of some of the incumbents like yours that are an obstacle to that, because there's almost enough to pass it. We just got to get rid of some of those dinos in the way, where there was zero chance of this 10 years ago. You know, he would get 1 or 2 co-signers. And
Right.
now there are literally over 100 queued up and ready to go with it, because more of the voters care about it. And all of our efforts to talk to people, they help to raise awareness of these issues. When you're out there talking about the impact of pollinators or whatnot, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you are doing the Lord's work and helping people to really relate to an issue and care about it when it otherwise seems very abstract or distant.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that he did is he started this movement. There are dozens of us running on a progressive platform.
Mm-hmm.
You can call it progressive, like you said before, that word's been kind of co-opted, but we're running
Mm-hmm.
because we want to get rid of the representatives like the one, who's our current representative, who has said he will never support universal health care.
Mm-hmm.
That is absurd.
Yeah.
That is absolutely absurd. Why would you say you would never support a policy that's going to save 70,000 lives and then nearly $500 billion every single year? And yes, there are going to be a few upfront costs, because whenever you start a business or start a new initiative, you have upfront costs, but the tail end savings into the future are overwhelming in
Right.
lives and money. And, people say, well, we can't afford it. My response is we can't afford not to do it. And the reality is that it's because of Bernie Sanders that I'm running and that dozens of others are running to try and make this happen, so that we
Right.
can start to make our lives as a nation better.
Exactly. We've got representatives all across this country who are actively harming their constituents and working against their interests. I mean, you've got an incumbent who is actively robbing the citizens in the 11th by forcing them to pay more for it. People are like, well, how do we afford Medicare for All? Well, hello, we're already paying more than it would cost. Like, we are paying more. It will... I often put it in terms for people out here, because, again, red district, and it makes sense. I try to tell people it's a tax cut, because it effectively is. If someone is going to have an extra $3,000, $5,000, $8,000 of their own money saved, and they're still going to get a better policy than they got from their employer, it's going to insure everyone and lower the costs. There's no competition between the administrative costs for Medicare and the administrative costs in a for-profit insurer. Medicare is like 5 times as efficient. There's no way around that. And those savings are ours. That's our money. Your representative is robbing his constituents by not supporting universal health care, and he's getting to get away with saying, well, it's because it's more expensive and blah, 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 blah. We have to cut through that noise somehow, and help people see
absolutely.
that. So yeah,
Absolutely.
Really, really happy to see you out there, like, fighting the good fight and going to all those meetings and talking to people. Because it spirals upward, from every conversation we have with people. Every conversation we have, I'm always trying to tell people, you have a lot of power if you're talking to your neighbors and your family, because they're more likely to sit down with you and listen in the first place. And if you can find the right way to frame a particular issue, if somebody can, and this is where, somebody like yourself can help one of your constituents to frame an issue well, that will help them then talk to their uncle or their parents or their friends or something on an issue, and it spirals outward. It's like ripples in a pond. It doesn't seem like much, but it really makes a difference.
Right. It's like that drop of water, right? One raindrop doesn't make a difference, but a bazillion is a rainstorm.
Right. Every
Yeah.
conversation we have is making a difference, and every person that we manage to bring awareness of a particular issue, or get them on board with something, is somebody else who can talk to somebody else who
Absolutely.
can keep this ball going. I'm always trying to encourage a lot of, okay, so again, I'll use the same word you just used, progressives, yes. Okay, so everyone is doing it, but whatever, it is still accurate. There's really something to be said for the progressive movement and its gains as a whole. And a lot of people keep getting really depressed about it. Oh, AOC is just playing the game, blah, blah, blah. And they start giving up on, oh, Bernie lost. They cheated Bernie, so I don't care anymore, and I'm not going to vote for them anymore. No, the fact that somebody with Bernie's positions won a ton of state primaries is a massive change. How well did, like, Dennis Kucinich do back in, what, 04 or whatever, when he was running? I mean,
Right.
like, the progressives had zero chance. They were immediately eliminated, and you were left with nothing but the conservative neoliberals. And now progressives are contenders. And that is a victory. And the more people we get in, the more squad members we get in there, and I honestly, I really hope to God that we've got another squad member here, another progressive in there. It really, everyone makes a difference.
I agree. I agree. I mean, it's really hard when there's just a small handful of people trying to fight the machine. And if you can increase some of those numbers and really work in a coordinated way to push, the thing that people forget about being a progressive, and the reason that others have co-opted the word, because perhaps they were progressive 30 years ago, is that they're trying to make progress. But when you made progress and made a difference 30 or 40 years ago, but you're still doing that, you're no longer progressive. You're
You're a conservative.
establishment.
Mm-hmm.
But in their minds, they think they're still progressive because they used to be decades ago. The reality is that progressives, by definition, are trying to push the envelope. They're
Mm-hmm.
trying to make progress, forward progress, to make things better. And that is a constantly evolving and moving target.
Right.
And I think that's where the confusion comes in for a lot of folks. So I am definitely purely progressive in that sense, because we need to push the envelope on healthcare, education, criminal justice reform, living wages, labor standards, so many issues, and they're all interconnected. And
Yes.
we've got to remember that that is what being a true progressive means. It means making progress to help people,
Right. And I think one of the single best things that progressive politicians can really do, and that progressive figures in general can do, is raise awareness of these issues, is by us standing up and saying, no, this is wrong, we should not have a quarter of the world's prison population, there is something wrong here. And get people talking about it, get them to care, build a sense of outrage about it. When we have more people in prison than China, India, and Indonesia combined, there is something fundamentally wrong. And I refuse to believe it's because Americans are uniquely evil people who need to be locked up. The problem is systemic. Tons of these areas are all interconnected, but we're not talking about them. And progressives can push the envelope, in the sense, to use the same phrase you've got there, by getting us talking about it, by bringing these issues into focus for people. And that ultimately is how things change. I think a lot of our politics have gotten far too timid. They're just unwilling to talk about issues. But you make an issue popular by talking about it. If you wait until the focus groups tell you it's safe to talk about it, you're not a progressive, you're a conservative. You're
Yeah.
you're letting you're letting popular opinion drive your politics. But our politics should be driving popular opinion, because most people will never have the time to read a dozen newspapers and follow these things. We need to be talking to people, and that's not elitist. It's just the way it always worked. And it's actually, you're still encouraging people to engage. If I'm out there telling people such and such, I'm hoping they go and look it up for themselves. They don't have to trust me. Please don't trust me. Don't trust me in anything. Look it up if you care. But
Yeah.
I have the time to look at this stuff, and I want more people to talk about it. And that's really a role that I think politicians used to take more seriously. You know, your FDR's with his fireside chats, he was taking a position that people hated, and he explained it in a way that made sense, and the popular opinion changed, and the polls
Right.
changed over and over again. 75% of newspapers said he's wrong, he's dangerous, he's a commie, whatever. They would throw all that crap at him, but he simply patiently explained the position to people, and they got it, and it
Yeah.
changed minds.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's a two-way street too, though. You know, when I call and I talk to people, or when I meet them on the streets and they ask me about things that I'm really not that familiar with, because a person can't know everything.
mm-hmm.
Um, I ask them to send me the information, or I look it up. And I have
Cool.
learned so much. I just got, I'm hearing a lot about filibuster, right? Filibuster, it's bad, it's this, it's racist, it's Jim Crow. And okay, I get that, right? Um, and then I was talking with someone on the phone a few days ago, and he said, I've written a white paper on the filibuster and why it needs to be eliminated, and why it's not even in the Constitution. It's not constitutional. And I was like, I never even really thought about it not being in the Constitution. It's simply a procedural issue. I
Mm-hmm.
asked him to send me the white paper, and now I'm more informed on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that part of my job, if I want to represent people, is not only helping explain things that they may not understand, but listening to them when they explain things that I may not understand,
Thank you.
because that's super important.
Absolutely. And to me, it's one of the reasons that I have frequently preferred the term populist to progressive in my own life. It's in part an effort to sort of reclaim it from the media narrative that keeps saying populist or like the right. They want to associate with like fascism or something. But populism is the authentic American center-left position. You know, the populist movement in the 19th century, was out there not only pushing progressive policies, but actually talking to the people and representing their interests and what was better for them, and listening, actually caring about it. I mean, a populist position is simply putting the people first, you
Exactly.
know. And I
Which is
think
what
that,
we're supposed to be doing.
yes, exactly. I really want more of the Democratic Party to recover some of that populist spirit that we had in the late 19th century and through into the 1950s and 60s, because we really started to lose it in the 60s.
Yeah.
And it's completely collapsed since then. I'm happy to see some of it recovering, but the fact that you're out there talking to people at all, how often do incumbents actually engage with their constituents? They go to fundraisers or they go to like carefully scripted events. They're not listening to the
I don't
people.
know. I called my representative. I left two different voicemails. I even called his wife and spoke to her and asked the representative to call me back. Yeah, I never heard from him. Crickets.
Yeah, there's and it's funnily enough, there's actually a very specific format that people have to follow in their letters and call us if they want a response. If you format it in the right way, they have to send you a response letter. And a lot of those response letters are they're just fluff anyway. They're not actually helpful. But most of the time they're not really listening, and it's just staff looking at that stuff. The more representatives we have out there actually talking to people and engaging, the better. And it's one of the reasons that I've loved seeing so much of this progressive insurgency. So I wish you Godspeed in all of this. So
you.
and I hope anybody watching this gets a better sense of who Allie is, and learns to love her as much as I am here from afar. So and we can cheer you on in your run.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. This was a super fun, informal event. I liked it. So,
Thanks,
yeah, and
thanks.
if you want to learn more about the campaign, hit up our website, Alley for Congress, ALLYFOR Congress.com. We've been posting new issues, so we got a few more to go. We just did a thing on for environment and climate and how folks can make a difference that we're getting posted because like you said, Liam, people are feeling anxious and depressed and like, what can I do? I'm starting to feel helpless. So we've got a little one pager, simple things you can do that really can make a difference if we
Right.
all do them collectively. And we're going to be posting our disability rights platform in the next couple
Oh,
weeks. And
nice.
yeah, we're continuing to work on the issues. We're super busy, so we're not getting them out as quickly as we would like. But that's because there's lots of exciting stuff going on. But we're plugging away and we're getting them done.
Yeah, I totally get it. I mean, they're always a work in progress getting that stuff out there. But I love that you're also very responsive too. So if somebody has a particular issue that they care about, they can raise it with you, and then it'll end up on the website later. So
Yeah,
that's great.
yep,
So,
absolutely.
so thanks very much for your time. I really enjoyed this, and
Thank
hopefully other
you.
people did.
Yes.
So once again, this was Allie Dalsimer running for Congress in Virginia's 11th, and we'll cheer her on.
Yay.
And I'm Liam O'Mara. When this was Office Hours with the Mad Professor. So if you enjoy this, rambling nonsense here, make sure you hit like and subscribe and all that business, and support me on Patreon. And have a great night.